Is the Earth bioenergetically sick? From the book by Bernd Senft, The Rediscovery of the Living, Omega Publishing, www.omegaverlag.de, www.berndsenft.de. The following is an attempt to apply Reich's bioenergetic understanding of disease and health to the large living organism Earth. The concept of the Earth as a living organism is rooted in ancient matriarchal or pre-patriarchal traditions and has been rediscovered or revived in recent decades under the term Gaia. James E. Lovelock has demonstrated, by evaluating a wealth of scientific research and data, that the behavior of the Earth's atmosphere, for example, cannot be adequately interpreted within the framework of classical mechanistic science, but indicates that the Earth behaves like a living organism, titled the Gaia hypothesis. In spiritually oriented circles, too, there is always talk of Mother Earth or the Great Earth Goddess, not to be confused with the idea of a patriarchal god. Geomancy, healing, holy places. The long-buried and gradually rediscovered empirical knowledge of so-called geomancy assumes that cosmic life energy flows around and through the Earth, and that there is a system of energy pathways and energy points on the Earth, corresponding to the acupuncture pathways and acupuncture points in humans. As cosmic energy flows through these points and pathways, the Earth would connect with a greater whole. This knowledge, or the sensing of the special energetic quality of certain places, used to be the basis for finding holy healing places, from which healthy influences, in the true sense of the word, emanated, or for avoiding interference field with pathogenic influences. Both the migratory movements of early tribes and the later settlement of specific areas, and the choices of locations for huts, houses, and sanctuaries followed the energy movements, and architecture was directed in terms of form, color, materials, and light, towards creating energetically healthy healing spaces, both through the work of patriarchal and sex-hostile religions, and through the work of mechanistic science on human beings. The unbroken, undistorted, direct contact with the life energy in and around us has been more or less destroyed and lost, and with it the feeling and knowledge of the connections indicated above. Although the churches have robbed man of this knowledge and destroyed the old sanctuaries of the life energy-based natural religions, they have in many cases still taken over their holy places, built their churches on them, and monopolized the corresponding knowledge for themselves or for their master builders. Mechanistic science, on the other hand, has not even done that, but has produced a technology and architecture that is blind in every respect to the life energy functional laws and the different energetic qualities of certain places and spaces. Out of this ignorance, out of this lost contact with the cosmic life energy in us and around us, a permanent and ever-increasing rape not only of human beings, animals, plants, and raw materials, but also of the life energy field of the Earth has been taking place for centuries. The chronically armored, mechanistically shaped human being has not only forgotten how to use the life energy in and around him for healing purposes, by declaring war on it or denying its existence and thereby permanently violating its functional laws, he changes the life-positive quality of energy and transforms it into destructiveness. I have explained in detail elsewhere how this process takes place in man, and how it can culminate in the most serious illnesses. In relation to what armored humanity has done to the organism Earth, there are amazing parallelisms, functional identities. Functional identity between man and the organism Earth. If the Earth is a living organism, flowed through and around by life energy, with which its flow processes connects the individual parts into a unified whole, then it can also become bioenergetically ill. Just as the human being can block the flow of life energy in his organism, so can the organism Earth. The energetic blockages can be temporary, but they can also become chronic. Between the blockages, the still flowing energy can accumulate and periodically discharge itself violently, temporarily breaking through the armor, in man as in the organism Earth, and against the background of chronic armoring, functional disturbances of the organism develop, which can finally turn into organic or material changes up to the structural decay of those parts which no longer have sufficient life energy flowing through them, which are chronically blocked. In humans, these connections are still conceivable. But what do they look like in the organism Earth? What could show that the Earth is bioenergetically blocked? What are the corresponding symptoms of illness? And where can bioenergetic healing of the sick Earth begin? I would like to approach these connections by applying Reich's functional research method, which is the detection of functional identity with simultaneous differences between Earth and man, or other living bioenergetic systems. Let us recall Reich's discovery of biogenesis, and in this context the so-called bions, which Reich described as the smallest energy bubbles in the transitional area between non-life and life. According to Reich's descriptions, they are filled and surrounded by an intense bluish radiation field, which he interprets as an expression of their life energy field, their organ energy charge. For him, the bions are the elementary material carriers of biological energy, a unity of material substance and the life energy surrounding and flowing through it. The blue planet, the Earth's life energy field. We are all familiar with the images of our planet taken from space. Several of these images clearly show the Earth as a blue planet, enveloped in an intensely bluish glowing field of radiation. There are no sharp contours against the black background of the universe, but rather a smooth transition. However, there are also images in which the bluish radiation field is either completely filtered out or the blurred contours are smoothed. Long before such photographs of the planet Earth from space existed, Reich had put forward the thesis in the 1950s that the Earth was surrounded by a life energy field which was stimulated by solar radiation to produce an intense bluish glow, but which also exhibited a weak shimmering, a luminescence perceptible to our eyes. An expression of this is the fact that the night sky, even away from any artificial light sources and even at new moon, is never black. Anyone who holds their hand between the sky and their eyes on a clear night with a new moon can convince themselves of this fact. It appears as a black silhouette against the background of the faintly shimmering sky. What we perceive as a blue sky during the day on some days is, according to the understanding, nothing other than the inner view of the Earth's life energy, excited by solar radiation. Something corresponding does not exist on the lifeless moon, for example. Plate 1, the blue Earth, taken from lunar orbit, July 1969, Apollo 2, NASA. The Earth's energy envelope has wounds. In those photographs in which the Earth's bluish radiation field has not been artificially filtered out, it is also possible to see how the Earth's surface is shrouded in a bluish haze in large regions, which makes all its different colors appear as if through bluish glasses. Not only the blue of the oceans, but also the green of the forests, the white of the glaciers. The many different shades of the rocks are tinted bluish, with one exception. The colors of this large desert area of this Earth can be seen in an almost unadulterated hue in the images from space, the only ones not enveloped and covered by this bluish veil, as if the life energy envelope of the Earth had a wound over these areas. Plate 2, the moon above the horizon of the Earth's atmosphere. September 1973, Skylab 3, NASA. Is the Earth cancerous? Everyone is familiar with the corresponding images, but hardly anyone normally thinks about them, precisely because far too few people know and are familiar with the life energy approach and perception of the Earth. But if one pays attention to photographs of the Earth, in which the life energy field is not filtered out, one will notice again and again. The Earth's energy envelope has the largest wounds over the areas of the great deserts: Sahara, Arabian Desert, Asian Desert. Other smaller wounds are found over the Namib Desert, and the Kalahari Desert in southern Africa, over the Australian desert, over the South American desert strip along the west coast, and, much weaker, in North America over the Arizona desert and the Nevada desert. Plate 3. The Earth's bluish life energy envelope has wounds over the large desert areas, taken from a distance of 26,000 kilometers. July 1969, Apollo 11, NASA. Are deserts perhaps the expression and consequence of a bioenergetic disease of the organism Earth? Are they even the tumors or metastases of an Earth suffering from cancer? And is the growth of deserts in recent decades, their expansion from their former core areas to their respective peripheries, the accumulation of drought catastrophes in previously fertile regions, is all this an expression of a threateningly progressive cancer disease of the Earth? Energetic solidification of the atmosphere and desertification. In fact, against the background of Reich's research, such a conclusion is obvious. As early as the 1950s, Reich had put forward the hypothesis that deserts might have arisen as a result of a profound life energy dysfunction of the atmosphere. While naturally the atmospheric life energy flows around the Earth in large-scale eddies and wave movements, carrying air and water vapor masses or clouds with it, the desert areas would be largely cut off from such currents because the life energy envelope of the atmosphere had solidified in these areas. The periodic flow of low-pressure systems with corresponding precipitation, and the alternation between low-pressure and high-pressure systems with correspondingly changing weather conditions could no longer take place under such conditions. The long-term lack of precipitation would not only cause vegetation to wither and die, but the solidified life energy, or door of the atmosphere, would even cause the structure of the rocks to disintegrate in the long term, as well as the structure of the clouds. What Reich had discovered for humans in the context of his bioenergetic cancer research seems to take place on a large scale, in a functionally identical way on the organism Earth. The chronic bioenergetic solidification of parts of the organism initially leads to functional disturbances and, with advanced development, to a structural decay of parts that become independent of the organism as a whole and destroy its viability in the long term. Is the Earth really cancerous, and are the spreading deserts its tumors? The Oriner experiment. How did Reich come to regard the Earth as a living organism? I have described the inner logic of his research process in detail elsewhere, and will limit myself here to a few brief hints. In the 1940s, he had succeeded in condensing the atmospheric life energy from space with the help of the ORGON accumulator and using it for healing purposes, among other things. Because of the unbelievable healing effects of concentrated life energy, Reich then raised the question at the beginning of the 1950s, against the background of the danger of nuclear war, whether this energy could possibly even be used to neutralize the life-threatening effects of radioactive radiation. This question formed the basis for a series of experiments he called the Oriner experiment, in which he combined unusually highly concentrated organ energy with small amounts of radioactive substance. Radioactivity and bioenergetic disease. In this series of experiments, the course and interpretation of which I consider to be revolutionary, and which has hardly been appreciated until today, Reich came across a hitherto unknown effect of radioactivity, which has become known to very few people. Radioactivity puts the atmospheric life energy into a state of overexcitation, which spreads through all shieldings and is transmitted to all living organisms as bioenergetic overexcitation. The result of this is fundamental disturbances of the life energetic functions, which can lead to the most serious illnesses and affect the individual organism most severely at its bioenergetic weak points, i.e., in the areas of the strongest blockages or the strongest congestion. Reich called the individually very different disease systems caused by this or the resulting disease process Oriner disease. One manifestation of this disease in humans is leukemia, but there are also many other symptoms that are conventionally classified by radiation medicine under the term radiation sickness, but which are not understood. Reich traces them back to the connection mentioned previously. The pathogenic effects of the Oraner effect therefore do not consist in the direct impact of radioactive rays on the living organism, but in an overexcitation of the atmospheric life energy field penetrating all matter, in which the living organisms are embedded with their bioenergetic system, and by whose disturbances they are affected in their living functions. Radioactivity and disturbance of the Earth's life energy envelope. From these observations and hypothesis of Reich's, it can be concluded that in the last decade since the beginning of the atomic age, not only atomic bomb explosions, but also nuclear power plants have had an independent and increasing Oraner effect on the life energy envelope of the Earth, which has caused the organism Earth with all its parts to become increasingly ill bioenergetically. At the time, Reich had already urgently warned against the illusion of a supposedly peaceful use of atomic energy, not to mention the dangers of a nuclear war. As a result of the Oraner experiment in 1951, he had observed dramatic changes in the atmosphere and weather, initially in the immediate vicinity of his laboratory. After a few months, the atmosphere had changed from its initial state of overexcitement to lifelessness and torpor, a state Reich called DOR, or deadly organ. A veil of gray lay oppressively over the landscape. The usual brilliance of the colors had completely disappeared. Everything seemed dull, and structured white clouds no longer formed. Only featureless, dull gray clouds, frayed at their edges, hung motionless over the landscape. Reich called them DOR clouds. The lakes lay motionless as lead. The trees let their branches hang limply. All in all, nature made a very sad, depressing impression. Reich interpreted this appearance as an expression of energetic solidification of the atmosphere, as a reaction to the preceding energetic overexcitement. Just as an energetically and emotionally inflamed human organism can tip over into torpor as a counter-reaction, just as perhaps a politically inflamed social organism can tip over into reactionary torpor, so too can the life energy of the organism Earth tip over from one extreme into the other. While on the one hand, Oraner and DOR are extreme opposites, they are at the same time identical on a deeper level. Both are an expression of a fundamental disturbance of the life energy function, an expression of a profound bioenergetic disease of a living system. The Oraner experiment has uncovered one of the essential causes for the bioenergetic illness of the organism Earth, the radioactive contamination of the life energy field of Earth. The living conditions in ORGON, which became more and more unbearable under the impression of the DOR atmosphere, formed the background for Reich at that time to think about possibilities of an energetic healing of the atmosphere. Here, too, his functional research method stood him in good stead. Just as in the case of energetically blocked people, it was a matter of carefully releasing the blockages and clearing the way for the natural flow of energy again. Perhaps the energetic blockage of the atmosphere could also be released in order to restore atmospheric self-regulation. The only question was how. Cloud busting, energetic healing of the atmosphere. Reich developed a method for this, which could be called sky acupuncture, or acupuncture of the atmosphere. He himself called the device he developed for this purpose cloud buster, and the method of its application cloud busting. Similar to acupuncture in humans, which uses simple metal needles to readjust the disturbed flow of energy, and in this way can bring about unbelievable healings, one could regard the cloud buster as an acupuncture needle in relation to the organism Earth. With the help of this device and its sensitive handling, Reich was able to release the energetic blockage of the atmosphere and restore the natural flow process of the atmospheric life energy, and thus the natural climatic self-regulation. It sounds unbelievable, but it is true. Nature regained its lost vitality and expressiveness. The atmosphere cleared. The sky became deep blue, white, clearly structured clouds formed again. Wind arose. The brilliant colors of the landscape, the lakes, the trees returned. The surfaces of the lakes rippled, and the unbearable pressure of the atmosphere had given way to an invigorating freshness. A piece of dying nature had been brought back to life. After various positive experiences with the application of the Cloudbuster, Reich decided to go on an expedition to the Arizona desert in the mid-50s to study the energetic conditions of the atmosphere there more closely and to influence them, in the true sense of the word, with his Cloudbuster. His energetic diagnosis of the atmosphere stated that there was a widespread energetic blockage to the west of the Arizona desert, which prevented the inflow of flowing life energy from the west, and thus also the inflow of humidity and low-pressure vortices from the Pacific. With the use of several Cloudbusters, he and his colleagues succeeded in releasing the energetic blockage in the atmosphere, with the result of long-lasting heavy rainfall, the likes of which had not been seen in the Arizona desert since time immemorial. The desert landscape, which until then had been completely dry and parched, began to revive and become green again. This laid the essential foundations for a regreening and revitalization of parched areas, for a reversal of the process of spreading deserts, for a widespread healing of the organism Earth that had become ill. Reich's incredibly hopeful research work was, however, abruptly interrupted by the court case brought against him, for which he had to return to the east of the USA, and which ended with his being sentenced to 2 years' imprisonment, and with the banning of his research and the burning of his books and all publications relating to the discovery, research, and use of organ energy. Electrosmog and Oraner effect. Since then, more than 40 years have passed, and that is also more than 40 years of nuclear technology, i.e. more than 40 years of rape of the life energy field of the Earth, in addition to all the other tremendously increased environmental burdens that are more or less generally known. The Oraner effect, however, does not only emanate from nuclear technology, but also, albeit in a weaker form, from a whole range of other technologically generated radiation sources. These include X-ray machines, display screen equipment, fluorescent tubes, radar transmitters, microwaves, high-voltage power lines, radio telephone transition masts. Some of the health impacts of cars with three-way platinum catalytic converters can also be interpreted against this background. Apart from X-ray equipment, the harmful effects of these radiation sources on health and the environment are by and large denied by official science. If those affected nevertheless complain of health hazards, they are often dismissed by the official side according to the pattern that what cannot be, must not be. By denying the existence of the life energy, official science naturally also prevents functional disturbances of the life energy, i.e., bioenergetic diseases, from being traced back to their causes. Only gradually is there an awareness that hitherto unrecognized and misunderstood health hazards emanate from a series of technical devices, phenomena which are now subsumed under the term electrosmog. Robert O. Becker has published his groundbreaking book, The Spark of Life, which contains a wealth of detailed experience and research results. In the German-speaking world, it is above all the research and publications of Wolfgang Volkerod and Hans Ulrich Hürtel. In this context, the research of Gunther Reichelt should also be mentioned, who has demonstrated with empirical studies that the degree of forest decline is drastically higher in the immediate vicinity of nuclear power plants, even in areas that are relatively unpolluted. In all three research papers, however, there is no reference to the existence of a life energy and to a possible bioenergetic interpretation of the corresponding health and environmental damage, but the empirical findings can largely be interpreted as the effect of the Oraner effect. Reichelt, by the way, has been denied further research funding on the grounds that there is no public interest in continuing this research. Hürtel has been banned by an electrical company from further publication of his research results under threat of a lawsuit for millions in damages. If both nuclear and electrosmog pollution are taken together, it can be seen that the Earth's life energy field has been exposed to an enormously increasing Oraner pollution over the last half-century. Particularly dramatic in this context was the reactor catastrophe of Chernobyl, but also the long chain of above-ground and underground atomic bomb tests, as well as the permanent exposure of nuclear power plants in normal operation, and the above-mentioned technological sources of radiation have raped the life energy of the Earth and continue to do so largely unrecognized and unimpeded to this day. Let us recall the time shortly after Chernobyl. We had radiant weather in Europe in the macabre double sense of the word. On the one hand, of almost unreal radiant clarity with an unbelievably deep blue cloudless sky. On the other hand, the ominously high radioactive contamination of the atmosphere. A distinct, stable high-pressure system had developed over Europe, which prevented the inflow of low-pressure vortices from the Atlantic for a longer period of time. This weather situation of a chronically settling high-pressure system can be interpreted as an expression of an extreme or in a reaction of the atmosphere, as an expression of overexcitation and overexpansion of the atmospheric life energy. If such a condition persists for a long time, the otherwise usual change in weather patterns fails to occur, and drought sets in. After Chernobyl, it was also possible to observe how the state of overexcitation of the atmosphere finally turned into its opposite, into energetic torpor, or door. Even before Chernobyl, there were always clear signs of a qualitative change in atmospheric energy towards door in Central and Southern Europe. The days of the year when a more or less thick veil of gray lay over the landscape had been becoming more frequent for quite some time. But after Chernobyl, my impression is that the lifelessness of the atmosphere, after the first Orion reaction, has once again been drastically intensified over a wide area. In the winters that followed, there were prolonged periods of smog in various major European cities, accompanied by smog alerts, up to and including total driving bans. But also at other times of the year, there was often a thick veil over the cities and over the landscape, even in countries that only 20 years ago were known for the deep blue of the sky and the incredible brilliance of the colors of the landscape, such as Greece, Italy, Spain, and southern France. After Chernobyl, the Alps, which used to inspire me with their incredible beauty and clarity of atmosphere, were often buried under a thick, oppressive, paralyzing veil of gray. Even in fine weather, which the meteorologists say is serene, yet they have no concept of it, do not even realize how sad nature looks and how sick it is. Northern Italy has also been covered in a thick veil of gray for long periods of time, as has Provence, which used to attract great painters because of its impressive colors and unusually clear light. Longer periods of door, of energetic solidification of the atmosphere, of lifelessness, have been violently interrupted again and again in the last 15 to 20 years, and even more so after Chernobyl, by the most violent hurricanes and cyclones of a kind hitherto unknown in Europe. It is as if the organism Earth is rebelling against the increasing solidification with increasing vehemence and is mobilizing the energies that are still flowing in order to break the solidification. This reaction is also reminiscent of the energetic functions of an emotionally armored human organism. The stronger the armor of a human being and the buildup of energy it produces, the more violent are the emotional outbursts that temporarily break through the armor. If these armorings are widespread in a society, they form the emotional ground on which collective violence can be discharged and must periodically be discharged again and again as long as the rigid basic structure remains unchanged. Reich described these mass psychological processes impressively, but also harrowingly in his Mass Psychology of Fascism. It seems that here again we are dealing with a functional identity between the individual organism, the social organism, and the organism Earth. The higher the degree of energetic solidification, the more violent the explosions or eruptions of pent-up energies. Is the increasing number and severity of storms worldwide in the last decades a bioenergetic reaction of the organism Earth to the energetic solidification that is increasingly happening to it, and thus a consequence of the bioenergetic illness of the Earth, caused by nuclear power and electrosmog, but also by the increasing pollution and poisoning? I mentioned above that the Orion effect hits the human organism worst, at its bioenergetic weak point. Does the same apply to the organism Earth? James DeMeo, which is one of the most competent people in the world in the field of cloud busting, and who has more than 20 years of practical experience in the application of this method, actually advocates such a thesis. If we assume that the desert areas are an expression and consequence of fundamental bioenergetic disturbances of the Earth's energy field, i.e., areas with chronic energetic contraction, door, or expansion, Oraner, then they would have to be hit most extremely by the Oraner effect. This seems to be contradicted by the fact that it is precisely the desert areas that are far away from civilization and industrialization. But the energy field of the Earth is a unified whole, an extremely sensitive system, like the energy field of every living organism. It is a continuum in which every part is embedded in the overall context and is in constant interaction and connection with the whole, or with the other parts. Such holistic connections are known in relation to the human organism. For example, from acupuncture, the energetic influence of an acupuncture point can cause effects at the completely different end of the body. DeMeo has observed over the years that the desert areas of this Earth have reacted not only to nuclear catastrophes such as Chernobyl, but also to above-ground and underground atomic bomb explosions by spreading their atmosphere to their periphery. As a result of atomic bomb tests in the Nevada desert, there have been repeated devastating droughts and, in summer, terrible heat waves with forest fires within a radius of several hundred kilometers at the edges of the desert, in areas that used to be fertile land. California, for example, was hit by years of worsening drought in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Even to distant atomic bomb explosions, the atmosphere of the deserts would respond with expansion, with a time lag depending on the distance from the site of the explosion. DeMeo links the devastating firestorms in Southern California in October 1993, which destroyed many luxury villas in the celebrity resort of Malibu, a suburb of Los Angeles, to the atomic bomb explosion detonated 3 weeks earlier in China. The Sahara's desert atmosphere has also been spreading northwards more and more for the last 1.5 to 2 decades and has produced repeated devastating droughts, initially in the countries of the Mediterranean region, with an increasing lack of precipitation even during the usual rainy periods of winter. At times, the Saharan atmosphere even stretched high into Central Europe, covering the landscape with an oppressive door veil and causing drought catastrophes and heat waves of unprecedented proportions. But there was also an expansion of the Sahara to the south or southeast, bringing with it the devastating droughts in the Sahel zone or the Horn of Africa. The Arabian Desert also seems to have expanded with its atmosphere and spread to the entire Middle East. The lack of significant precipitation for many years, even during the rainy periods, had finally worsened the situation by autumn 1991 and made water supplies so scarce that the media repeatedly voiced the fear that the next war in the Middle East would be sparked over scarce water supplies. The atmospheres of the Namib Desert and the Kalahari Desert in southwest Africa have also increasingly extended to the periphery since the early 1980s and spread to the whole of southern Africa. Rainfall during the usual rainy periods decreased more and more until the drought catastrophe came to a very dramatic head in 1992. It was feared that in the absence of substantial rainfall in the coming rainy season of 92 to 93, the greatest famine catastrophe of this century would loom. The beginning of the decrease and finally the absence of rainfall, first in Namibia and later in the whole of southern Africa, coincides with the opening of the largest uranium mine in the world, where uranium is mined in open cast mines. Here, the spatial and temporal connection between radioactive contamination of the atmosphere, the Oraner effect, and the expansion of the desert atmosphere seems obvious, in contrast to other desert areas, which are predominantly covered by a thick door veil. In Namibia, it was obviously a case of an Oraner state, a state of chronic overexcitation and overexpansion of the atmospheric life energy. It is characterized by an almost unreal clarity of the atmosphere and a brilliance of colors, with a chronically persistent high-pressure system preventing the influx of low-pressure systems and precipitation. These are all just a few references to observations made mainly by James DeMeo, but also by me over the years. They are intended to encourage us to look at the intensification of climate catastrophes from the life energy point of view, as an expression of bioenergetic illness of the Earth, and as a reaction of the Earth's life energy field to nuclear technology and electrosmog. Energetic weather work according to Reich. The catastrophic climatic developments in many parts of the world seem to promise little hope for improvement, and yet, there is justified hope for healing the Earth that has become ill. The foundations for a bioenergetic recovery of the atmosphere have been laid, and the experience already gained with these methods is extremely encouraging. The fact that their mode of action is not understood by the established sciences does not speak against these methods, but against this kind of science, whose mechanistic worldview is far too narrow to understand life processes, their energetic disturbances, and their energetic healings. The methods of energetic weather work, of cloud busting, have not been lost with the death of Reich, with the burning of his books, and with the banning of his research in the USA, but have been taken up again and continued by others. The most competent people in the world in this field, who have also documented and published the most on corresponding research and experiments, are Richard A. Blasband and James DeMeo. Blasband has carried out cloud-busting work for years, especially in the USA, and reported on it in a long series of articles in the American Journal of Orgonomy. The abbreviation for this kind of energetic weather work is CORE, Cosmic Organ Engineering, or OROP, Organ Operation, abbreviations that were also used by Reich. DeMeo has not only conducted or led cloud-busting operations in the USA, but also in Greece, Cyprus, Israel, and Namibia. His publications on this subject can be found in the Journal of Orgonomy and in the journal Pulse of the Planet, which he edits, as well as in individual self-published brochures, OROP Arizona, OROP Israel. His reports also include the evaluation of relevant meteorological data before, during, and after the cloud-busting operations. For example, the evaluation of a series of tests in 1989 in the Arizona desert shows that there was unusual precipitation within a radius of several hundred kilometers around the operation site, a few days after each operation. After this series of experiments, Blasband and DeMeo only used this method in acute or chronic emergency situations of atmospheric climatic blockage, with sometimes unimaginable effects. Thus, in the wake of an extensive cloud-busting operation in California in the spring of 1991, the largest drought catastrophe in California in this century, with heavy and prolonged rainfall, which was called a miracle, Miracle March, by the media and the public, came to a surprising end. A year-long and worsening drought in Greece in the early 1990s prompted cloud-busting operations on the ground for James DeMeo. His attempt to create rain outside the usual rainy season was unsuccessful. Cloud-busting work may be ineffective if it is used against the rhythm of nature. What it can apparently do, however, is to pave the way for the natural rhythm, if it is blocked, by dissolving blockages. On the other hand, after the 1990 cloudbuster operation in Greece during the usual rainy season, heavy rain set in, which had been absent until then, and the drought catastrophe ended. In more southern regions, Cyprus, however, the drought continued and only dissipated after cloud-busting operations had been carried out there as well. The Middle East, however, remained plagued by a devastating drought, so DeMeo conducted cloud-busting operations in Israel, titled OROP Israel. A few days after the completion of these operations in November 1991, heavy rainfall began in Israel and throughout the Middle East. While the water reservoirs had previously been completely depleted, the rainfall replenished the lakes and underground reservoirs, and the drought disaster ended. The sequence of operations in Greece, Cyprus, and Israel appears like a gradual melting of a large-scale energy blockage in the atmosphere, involving ever larger areas in the energetic and climatic revival. These experiences give rise to the hope that even the widest and strongest blockages of atmospheric energy over the large desert areas could gradually melt away, and in this way, the deserts could be revived and made fertile again. James DeMeo has indeed launched a long-term oriented project, which he calls the Desert Greening Project. And after all that is already available in terms of experience in this field, it is not inconceivable that the project's goal of greening the deserts again could become reality in the foreseeable future. First of all, however, it is a matter of reclaiming for life, irrigating and revitalizing those previously fertile areas that have been parched by the encroaching desert atmosphere and gradually incorporated into the desert in order to protect the people and animals living there from devastating famines. Cloud-busting operations in Namibia in November 1992 and February 1993, titled OROP Namibia, led by James DeMeo, were guided by this goal. The operations in an atmosphere of extreme energetic overexcitation or overexpansion, titled ORINER, were aimed at counteracting the energetic expansion and supporting the otherwise natural but blocked flow of large-scale weather systems in order to shrink the desert atmosphere that had expanded over the whole of southern Africa. As a result of some operations in November 1992, the outer periphery of the Namib Desert, the countries surrounding Namibia, again received considerable rainfall after years of drought, and the drought situation eased considerably. Namibia, however, was still a little affected by this until the start of the second phase of the operation in February 1993. After a series of operations at different locations, which increasingly approached the hard core of the desert from the inner periphery inside Namibia, and concluded with an operation at the edge of the desert, heavy and extensive rainfall occurred in large parts of Namibia and into the Namib Desert. In most of the rest of southern Africa, too, the drought catastrophe seemed to have been overcome, and the atmosphere seemed to have regained its natural rhythm for some time. All this work, by the way, has not yet been supported with a single dollar or a single mark from the government. All attempts to gain even the interest of official bodies have ultimately always come to nothing and failed. In most cases, messages, requests, or applications have been completely ignored. At best, some people were open-minded at first, but after some time they kept silent and did not even react retrospectively to the unbelievable changes that had occurred in the wake of the cloud-busting operations, and which could not have escaped the attention of those who knew about the planned operations. Presumably, in order to make their decision, they first sought the opinion of so-called experts or specialists, or classically trained meteorologists, in order to secure themselves with their advice. And what the advice of an expert looks like, in whose scientific discipline the existence of a life energy is not seen, is actually clear. From his expert point of view, he will only warn against taking such charlatanry seriously, let alone supporting it financially. Where then have the funds come from to finance such projects of energetic weather work? So far, exclusively from donations of some private persons who know about the importance and the possibilities of this method and want to support this work. It is quite astonishing how in each case the necessary funds came together at the right time, and the people concerned got together to support the work in one way or another, for example by making available waterfront locations for the use of the equipment. Obviously, supporting living processes does not require a large bureaucratic apparatus, but a spontaneously forming cooperation of people who are aware of their responsibility for the living and act accordingly. Plate 4. Energetic Drought Control with the Help of the Cloudbuster. OROP Namibia, under the leadership of James DeMeo. February 1993.